This is Jigoro Kano, the founder of Kōdōkan Judo. Professor Kano learned the traditional Japanese martial art, Jujutsu, and transformed it into something new, employing the objectives and methodology appropriate to a new era. In 1882, he named it Kōdōkan Judo. Judo, which Professor Kano promoted with all his might for half a century, gradually became more and more popular around the world, and has now achieved recognition as an Olympic event. Judo is now practiced in 178 countries throughout the world. Judo techniques can be divided into three categories. They are Nage Waza, throwing techniques, Katame Waza, grappling techniques, and Atemi Waza, striking techniques. Atemi Waza, however, are not used in Judo matches. Nage Waza or throwing techniques can be divided into Tachi Waza, standing techniques, and Sutemi Waza, sacrificing techniques. There are 67 techniques in all, and they're classified as shown here. Let's look at the basics of each technique and how it's applied, focusing on the differences between techniques that may appear similar with examples from actual competitions. Seoi Nage. In Seoi Nage, you grasp one side of your opponent's collar and put your elbow underneath his arm as you lift and throw him over your shoulder. Here, you grasp your opponent's sleeve as well as one side of his collar. This Seoi Nage was applied after stepping out wide to the side. It's a variation of Seoi Nage and not a Tai Otoshi. This Seoi Nage was applied just with an upward lift of the right hand. He did not grasp his opponent's sleeve. Here he grasped one side of his opponent's collar.
kani basami. Kani basami is a technique of throwing where you sandwich your opponent's body using both your feet. As soon as your feet are on a line with your opponent's, sandwich his abdomen and legs between your legs and throw in a sacrificing movement.
According to the rules of Kōdōkan Judo, kani basami may be allowed with due regard to the level and scale of competition. Under IJF rules, however, kani basami has been a prohibited act since 1991 and will result in hansokumake if applied. Kawazunake. Since the technique involves falling together with your opponent, it's often dangerous and is therefore prohibited in a tournament.